Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms.
Welcome, one and all, to another episode of the Criterion Collectors Podcast. I am your host, Rosalie Lewis.
And I'm your other co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And today on the podcast, we are going to be discussing, because it is the month of October, movies in the Criterion Collection that are a bit scary. I don't know if you'd qualify as horror movies necessarily, but certainly they were sort of prototypes for the horror movies that we see today. So today we're talking about Island of Lost Souls, which came out in 1932. It's a pre-code film. Cat People, 1942. And The Night of the Hunter, which came out in 1955. And as of this recording, you can watch both Cat People and Night of the Hunter, I believe, on the channel. Island of Lost Souls is streaming on Peacock TV. If you don't have access to that, obviously check your library for the Criterion disc. But all three of these movies I found quite delightful. And in fact, I'd watched all three of them before, but it was great to revisit them. And I'm excited to talk about them with you. But Tim, I think for you, at least one or two of these might have been first-time views. Is that right?
Yes, I'd only seen Cat People. I saw that in a film class a number of years ago. But the other two I had heard of many things about, especially Night of the Hunter, but I had never seen them beyond. I saw some clips of Night of the Hunter in a thing once, but I hadn't properly watched it.
So we're going to start out with Island of Lost Souls, as that's the earliest one. And this one, like I mentioned, came out in 1932, and it stars Charles Laughton, Bela Lugosi, Richard Arlen, Leela Hyams, and Kathleen Burke as the Panther Woman. We'll get into that in a minute. We have a Cat People and a Panther Woman involved here. And this one is based on The Island of Dr. Moreau, which you've probably heard of. That movie adaptation came out, I believe, in the 80s as well. But this was the first one, and it was the first non-silent film adaptation of that novel.
Which is based off H.G. Wells' book.
Yep, loosely. Exactly. And basically, it's about a scientist on an island who's conducting these secret experiments that are creating half-human, half-beast creatures. And a shipwrecked man comes upon it and kind of gets pulled in to the web of craziness that's going on this island. So that's the basic premise, and it's beautifully shot. I think right from the first few opening frames, you can tell that this is just going to be a high-quality movie, even if the premise might initially sound like a B picture. And to be honest, the first time I watched it, I kind of thought it was going to be something cheesy or laughable in a way, because, you know, it's dated. It's from 1932, and I was pleasantly surprised with how unsettling it actually is. So I'm curious to hear what your reaction was, because this would have been your first time watching it.
It's certainly, I think, unique for, 1932, and I think it's certainly something you would not have been able to do a few years later once the code was into effect. But I think what makes this film, I think, particularly great and helps sell it, I mean, yes, it's shot well and all that, but yeah, I think it's really that you have the quality cast, I think, is what does it, especially Charles Laughton. But I mean, Charles Laughton, Richard Arlen, and Bela Lugosi, and I want to double check. It's a character actor who I am familiar with, but I can't remember his name. Arthur Hole, I think, really helps sell it all. I think if you had everything being the same but the cast, and if the cast was lesser, I think the film would not work nearly as well, because it's really the cast that sells the whole thing.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, because with just a little bit more super seriousness or just a little bit more smirking, it could go one way or the other and just not work. I also find that the atmosphere really sells it, because there's some really great shots, like right when Edward Parker, who's the traveler that gets stranded here, right when he gets, you know, kind of stuck on the island, Charles Laughton, who plays Dr. Moreau, is standing with him in front of the opening to this cave that leads back into the jungle and ultimately into the whole area where these things are going on. And it sets this tone visually of, you see the sea, you see the sky, but it's shot from the back of the cave. And you can tell from here on, things are going to get dark. Things are going to get twisted. You don't know who's hiding in the shadows. And we've already seen it by this point, like some strange men that have a lot more hair than normal, and just a lot of like weird looks between Charles Laughton and his partner, played by Arthur Hole. And so it does settle like a weird atmosphere onto the picture. And then of course, as the movie goes on, I feel like that continues, and the cinematography is really well done by Karl Struss, who also did Murnau's A Song of Two Humans, the Sunrise movie.
Oh, wow. Okay.
As well as Great Dictator. So he's a really skilled cinematographer in the silent pictures, and I think that lends itself well to some of the things that are unspoken that are happening in this movie. And I don't know, for me, it just added like another layer of creepiness.
This is one of those movies where you can tell from very early on that there's something weird going on, and I mean, partially cinematography, but again, I have to go back to the cast. I think Charles Laughton sells that the best, because he is this guy who initially is kind of polite and all this stuff, but very quickly he seems very odd and then weird, and then the weird just transforms into this pure, just kind of oh god, what's the word? I think maybe cruelty and just lack of empathy for anybody, and that helps the tone, I think, more than anything, is his performance.
Yeah, he definitely is. I wouldn't say sadistic necessarily, but you're right. It doesn't seem like he does have some sadism, and he also just doesn't seem like he cares about the pain. It's just about how his science can be advanced, and he's going to become famous by all of this.
Those are some of my less successful experiments. They supply the power to create others, more successful. But with each experiment I improve upon the last, I get nearer and nearer. Mr. Parker, do you know what it means to feel like God?
Some interesting things that I picked up on in watching it, and I don't know necessarily if they're derived from the original book or from this movie, but I noticed, of course, House of Pain, which, is the band that does Jump Around. And that's, in this movie, a much more serious thing. The House of Pain is where these surgeries are performed and these horrible things happen. And then every night, the Beast Men have this sort of ritual where they recite the laws that they've been given. And, they talk about not killing and not eating meat and things like that. But they keep saying, are we not men? And of course, that reminded me of Are We Not Men? We Are Devo, being a Devo fan, which I read, and that is what it's based on. So some interesting musical connections, in addition to what I'm sure are some cinematic legacies that this movie left. But yeah, certainly very interesting. And I think Van Halen also has a song called House of Pain.
I think Bela Lugosi is great in this film.
Oh, yeah.
He's not in the film as much as I thought he was going to be. He's only in a handful of scenes. But I feel bad for Bela Lugosi because, beyond his personal life stuff that he experienced later in life, he is really a great actor. And I think it's a shame that I think if people properly watch his films, you can see the variety of stuff that he can do. But I think people who don't just see him as Dracula, which again, he does great as Dracula, but even like the other Universal horror films that he did, like the Frankenstein films that he did as Igor and all that stuff. It's wildly different stuff than like Dracula and all that. And then he's doing this film, which again is wildly different from the stereotype of who he is. And it's very good. And I think this is one of the films you can maybe see. Again, he's not in the film a lot. There's other films like the Frankenstein films that he was in that you can see him showcased more in bigger parts. But if you want to see maybe more variety from him, you can see this film, which is totally different. And hell, you probably won't even. The only reason you could probably know that was him without looking at the credits is his voice, because you can't really tell that it's him. So it's this kind of great total transformation to something totally different that highlights his skills at character acting.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think this is completely a transformation from what you're used to if you've seen the Dracula films, for sure. And he does play sort of a sympathetic character. So, yeah, I 100% agree.
His
is the hand that makes. His is the hand that heals. His is the house of faith.
I, of course, was very drawn to Kathleen Burke, who plays Lota, the Panther Woman, and she really is just this transfixing presence. Like, she has this look about her where she's, got the dark eyeliner and the long, crazy hair, and she's just really got a great energy. And when I was doing a little research on it, apparently she was discovered as part of a search for the Panther Woman, and she was a dental assistant from Chicago originally. So not a lot of acting experience before this, but she does a really great job as this, beast who's kind of got more human qualities. And of course, Dr. Moreau wants to see what will happen if she seduces Parker, and Parker kind of starts to fall for it. But yeah, I mean, who wouldn't be transfixed by this gorgeous and slightly insane looking lady? I think she does a great job. I really liked her in this movie. She pretty much stole it for me.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen any of her other stuff. She didn't do a lot of films. I think her career kind of fizzled out sometime in the 30s, and I think partially because I think she was typecast.
Probably, yeah.
I think because of this part from what I was reading. And there was some other, I didn't confirm whether this was true or not, but there was another actress who was a famous actress who, I forget who it was, but I think she had tried out for the Panther Woman, and she wanted it, and they didn't go with her, and she, I think, was friends with Kathleen Burke or something, and she was eventually happy she didn't get it because she saw how Kathleen Burke was basically typecast, and eventually left movies because she couldn't really get anything else besides similar-ish parts to this.
Talk to me.
Loda, do you know what this is?
Book.
Yes, book. From Dr. Moreau's library. About electricity, wireless telegraphy, radio. How to build a shortwave transmitter. Of course, you haven't the faintest idea what I'm talking about, have you? I'll tell you something you will understand. I must get away from this island.
Book? Take you away.
Maybe book take me away. Loda! Why did you do that?
Book take you away.
Let's talk about the makeup a little bit, because the makeup was done by people who I'm not familiar with. Charles Gamora?
Okay.
I don't know if I pronounced that right. And then Wally Westmore. I don't know if that's related to Bud Westmore, who later did stuff later at Universal. But I think the makeup for this is really good, especially for basically all of the beings, for lack of a better word, that Moreau is creating. It's all really, really good. I mean, you can't see seams in it or anything like that. It's just, they look like they're just what they are. I mean, especially the Lugosi character. It's all kind of shockingly well done makeup that they have throughout this film.
Yeah, I agree. I was wondering where they found so many weird looking extras, but I think it really is mostly practical effects and makeup. But they really did a great job of making these singular looking creatures that don't look like any people or animals that you've seen before, but you can tell that there's elements of both. I would say for me, the story is a little bit reminiscent of Planet of the Apes to a little bit of an extent, just in the sense of the role reversals. And I think that the effects in this are just up there with Planet of the Apes, even though it was super long before that. Just very convincing and very creepy and off-putting.
Did you find the kind of greater messages of the film, did you like those, or were you wanting, or?
I think it's one of those movies where you can almost graft on different interpretations to it, because the one thing that I was thinking about, and I brought it up again in my mind when you were talking about how Parker doesn't seem all that bothered once it's explained to him. I feel like in some ways it's a critique of colonialism overall, and certainly the way that people from the West viewed what they would consider to be natives, right? They don't necessarily see them as being equal humans. And so there's that racism leads to them mistreating people that are different from themselves and perhaps, exercising eugenics or doing horrible things. So in some ways, I felt like whether that was the intention or not, I felt like it was a critique of that. And that's something that's still somewhat relevant now. I feel like, there's plenty of people out there, unfortunately, that still see certain groups as different from themselves and therefore less than human or less worthy of care. So I thought that message still resonated.
You also have, obviously, the prevailing topic in, I think, early talkies of scientists going too far.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, obviously you have probably more famously than anywhere else you have in Frankenstein. It's kind of interesting to see people, kind of the early 30s filmmakers' approach to science and all that. It seems to be always be a very kind of fearful aspect to it in these early films. And do you like how they handled that? Is that something that was kind of done in a different way, or is it kind of standard for what you would maybe see in like a Frankenstein or later in something like Jurassic Park or whatever?
I feel like this one, it shows it more as a tragedy than a scary horror story, I guess. Whereas I feel like, yes, to a certain extent, Frankenstein, his monster is a tragic figure, but there's also a little bit more fear involved there. Whereas I feel like with this one, it really truly is like these poor creatures are at the mercy of a mad scientist who doesn't care about how they feel. And yeah, so I think in that way it's a little bit different from other movies of that era, even going further to like, the King Kongs or the Godzillas, where there's a creature that's to be feared, but it's also sort of created because of humans or being exploited by humans. I think there's a certain theme that carries through, that humans should be more like the guardians of the world instead of exploiting the things that they find for their own purposes. So it seems like it's of a piece with that.
Mm-hmm. And not forgetting the value of life over, the value of, progressing science or your career or whatever, which it seems to be like a lot of the scientists in these movies tend to lose their way because of that. They're losing sight of the value of those things. Our next film is Cat People, which was from 1942. It's directed by Jacques Turner and produced by Val Lewton. For those who don't know, Val Lewton specialized in, or is best known for films that he made in the 40s that kind of went against what particularly Universal was doing in the 30s and then also into the 40s, of these kind of overt monster movies with characters like the Frankenstein monster, Dracula, Wolfman, and all that, where the Lewton films focus more on the horror concept of what you don't see is scarier than what you do see, and they're more cerebral, they're slower builds, they're more focused on atmosphere, and they're not particularly showy. But this one is about a woman named Irina, played by Simone, who is, I think in real life was actually French, but in this film they say she's Serbian.
Yep, she's Serbian.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and she is doing, I think, fashion designing or some sort of concept drawings in, I think it's New York City or a similar big city, and she runs into, I think it's like an engineer played by Kent Smith, and they kind of fall for each other, and they get married, but Irina is hesitant to consummate their love because she has this old superstition of, there was a story back where she grew up of, to make a long story short, of these cat people these people who would turn into, I think might be panthers actually, speaking of the panther woman.
Mm-hmm.
But they would transform into panthers when they got angry, or when they would get sexually excited, or when they would have certain emotions, they would turn into these, vicious cat people who would murder people.
The Mamelukes came to Serbia long ago, and they made the people slaves. Well, at first, the people were good and worshipped God in a true Christian way. But little by little, the people changed. When King John drove out the Mamelukes and came to our village, he found dreadful things. People bowed down to Satan and said their masses to him. They had become witches and were evil. But King John put some of them to the sword, but some, the wisest and the most wicked, escaped into the mountains.
Irina is afraid that that will happen to her, and despite what her husband Oliver, the reason he tries to give her, she just will not give up on this old legend. And so she's a psychiatrist who's played by Tom Conway, not Tim Conway, Tom Conway. And there's also this woman named Alice who Oliver works with, who have this sort of almost romantic relationship, and Irina gets jealous of that. And the whole film is this kind of slow build of Irina getting more and more worried about turning into a cat and basically killing her husband, and her husband getting more worried about it and slightly more fed up about it, and all that. So this, like I said at the top, this was the only film of these three that I had seen prior to preparing for this podcast. And I remember, unless my memory is playing tricks on me and I'm only remembering how I felt for the scenes I liked the most, I remember liking it a lot when I saw it years ago in a film class. It didn't quite work for me this time. I wouldn't say, though, as a disclaimer, that might just been my mood, so I don't want to totally put it on the film itself. But I think it does do very well with the slow build, and there are some genuinely scary scenes, which I'm sure we'll get to. But I think it does sell very well the psychological stuff, and again, the what you don't see is scarier than what you do see concept. But what's your kind of prevailing kind of general thoughts about this film, especially seeing it recently?
So the first time I watched it, which was a few years ago, I had it built up a lot for me because I had recently listened to a whole podcast series about Val Lewton, and I was really excited. And I watched it not realizing how subtle it was going to be. And that time through, I thought it was really interesting, but it wasn't quite as intoxicating as I was hoping. I was a little let down. This time, going back in with the memory of thinking, well, it was pretty good, but not amazing, my mind changed, and now I think it's amazing. So I'm not sure if it's about expectations or what, but maybe just settling into the mood of the movie. I really liked the visuals. They were absolutely outstanding, from not just the type of like shadow play that is done, but also the set design. I loved that in her apartment there's this gorgeous Art Deco mural of a panther on the wall. I like that there's a statue of, King John like spearing the panther. I like there's pictures of cats kind of placed throughout her apartment. So I liked the look of it. I also loved this time around some of the dialogue. There's a scene early on when she's first brought Oliver Reed, which not the actor, but that's the character's name. Mm-hmm. She's brought him up to the apartment, and it's very dark in there. She doesn't turn the lights on right away, and she says,
I like the dark. It's friendly.
And, I loved that line. I think it sums up her character quite well. And I liked his line later on that same evening when he wants to stay longer, but he's already been there for a while, and he says,
boys who come to tea can't expect to stay to dinner.
And so he leaves. And there's just like these little things. I also liked, just some of the interplay between her and the therapist later on as well, which we'll, I'm sure, get into. But yeah, I liked a lot of the dialogue, and I liked the visuals. I liked that there's a jump scare that ends up not being scary, which we'll probably get to later. Yeah, so it worked for me this time for sure.
Well, let's get into the scares for the film. So, yeah, the film, like we said before, the film is not particularly showy. It's all just kind of atmosphere, music, and shadows, and all that. There's a scene in this film that there was a phrase that came out of it called Luton Bus, which there's a scene, I won't ruin the scene, but basically there's a scene where the woman from Oliver's work, Alice, she is afraid that she's walking, I think, down a tunnel or something, and she starts hearing noises, and she's, I think, maybe starting to get a bit afraid that maybe there is something to Irina's claim of turning into a cat person. And something happens, and we have a scare, even, well, I don't want to give too much away about it, but there is a scare that comes out of that. And I think that type of scare is what we see throughout most of the movie, but it never gets repetitive with it. I think partially because they don't do a lot of them. But even though that's the type of scene we're seeing most of the time in terms of the horror elements, they make it work again and again, which I think is actually kind of surprising thinking about it.
Yeah, it is surprisingly effective, and there's so much in this movie that's done by implication, probably in part because they were now functioning under the Hays Code, and so they were not able to be quite as explicit as Island of Lost Souls. But I think that works better. I think it's scarier because for a while we're not sure whether Irena is losing her mind and is just superstitious and she's maybe just afraid of men or something, like it's unclear, or if she really is, one of these cat people that may transform at any moment. And so I liked that ambiguity because I feel like it builds kind of throughout the movie until the end when it's a lot more clear what was happening. So yeah, I kind of liked that you don't see everything. And I also liked that because it's so subtle throughout, the little things have a bigger impact.
Yeah, and you won't want to go swimming after you see this movie.
No, you won't. Oh my God. That was the scariest scene for me.
Yeah,
sure.
that was the scene thinking about this film for years, that was the scene I would always think of when I would think about this film, which it didn't work for me as much in this viewing, which again might just be a mood thing that I was thinking. But yeah, I think probably the best scene in the movie, using every element of that in terms of the light and the shadows, but also the environment that that they're in and the echoes and all that stuff. It's just a perfect use of all the elements in the scene and all that stuff to create something that is genuinely terrifying in a way that you could understand, because I think there's something kind of, in a silly way, but kind of something kind of scary about pools in a way, because I think, at least for me, because you can't see very well what is under you, so that's a bit scary, and it's just can be in itself kind of a scary thing. So then they're using that in this film very well, and it is made worse because it's an everyday, to an extent, everyday thing, and so we can put ourselves in that situation very easily, so it becomes even scarier, I think, because of that.
Right. And I feel like it's a bit claustrophobic, right? Because, the character is there in a very vulnerable and exposed position, quite literally, right? Because, she's just in her bathing suit and completely kind of unprotected. And then
you can't go anywhere.
You can't go anywhere. You're trapped. There's like one way out. It's a small room. And there's, either the water or the shadowy outskirts of the pool. And then there's all the reflections that are moving around too from the water. So I thought that was a really great use of, it wasn't a set, it was an actual location that they found. I guess it was like a small apartment complex turned hotel that was somewhat near Hollywood that they found, and it's just perfect to set that mood.
I wonder if that pool's still there.
I don't know, but if it is, I both do and don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Maybe with the lights on.
Yeah, the lights on. All the lights on, and maybe other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about this horrible psychiatrist that she has?
Oh my God, the
he
worst.
is, well, I don't know necessarily if the way he's trying to treat her is necessarily bad, but he has no professionalism whatsoever.
Let's talk about boundaries, dude.
The only thing I could think about during this film was when he started to get more, when the doctor started getting fresh with Irene. It was that scene in Clue where they're talking about Professor Plum and why he can't practice medicine anymore. That line of Tim Curry's, well, do you know what doctors aren't allowed to do if they're lady patients? Another character, yes. Well, he did. and that's the only thing I can think of throughout this entire film.
Yeah.
and
That sums it up.
and yeah, this whole I'm just like, dude, why are you doing? I mean, I know it's 1942, but I think they would know at that time you don't try to sleep with your darn patients.
Right, especially one that may be like crazy. Yeah, he was shady. But I liked I liked when she does go to him the first time and she does the hypnosis thing and everything. And at the end of the appointment she says, "Well, what shall I tell my husband?" Naturally, he's anxious for some word. And the doctor's like, "What does one tell a husband? Nothing." And it's at first it's like, oh, like he's, honoring like the doctor-patient relationship, but then later you're like, no, he's being shady. He just wants to steal her. He plays it very well though. Like he's just creepy enough. He doesn't go over the top with it.
It was very good. He kept reminding me of somebody throughout this entire thing. I looked at his filmography thinking that I must have seen him in something, that I don't recognize any of the films he had been in, unless I missed something. But I don't know. I think he reminds me of I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think maybe it's because he reminds me of George Sanders or
They're
something.
brothers, so that would make sense.
Are they brothers?
They are brothers.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Well, that would be why. Okay,
Yeah,
I didn't know
that's
that.
probably what it is, honestly.
Well, who's taking the stage name then? Is it Sanders or is it Conway who are taking?
I believe it is Conway. I believe that they're both, the last name is Sanders.
Okay, well that'd be why, because I kept thinking, oh, I recognize him, and I was like, well, he reminds me of George Sanders a little bit, but it's like, well, I know it's not him though, so I thought I'd seen him in something else. Okay.
Yeah, they are brothers, so
Okay.
you're correct.
Okay.
In fact, Sanders starred in a number of Val Lewton pictures as well, so
Okay, well that's
very interesting.
that's why he looks like him too. Okay.
Could be, yeah, family resemblance there. One thing that I thought was interesting that they did well here too was sound design.
Oh yeah.
I think that's something that gets overlooked, but I feel like older movies often did a really great job with that. So she lives by a zoo. She lives by the Central Park Zoo. So in addition to going to the zoo and like visiting the panther and the lion and the tiger, she also can hear from her apartment sometimes at night the noises that the animals are making. And that sound is very effective. Like it's super unsettling, even though we know it's a natural sound, but it's still, in the context of this movie, it is scary.
Well, because it sounds because she says it sounds like a mixture of like a cat and like somebody screaming, and when you finally hear it, it's actually exactly what it sounds like.
It is exactly what it sounds like. Yes. And I would love to know, how they did the Foley for this and whether they actually recorded animals or if that was like people trying to imitate animals, but it certainly was off-putting.
Yeah, I mean, I think a film like this is kind of made by its sound design. It's something you really wanted to get right in a film like this, because if your sound design isn't good, then you lose most of if not all of your horror elements. I mean, that pool scene that we mentioned would be, if you had crap sound design, it would be just kind of dull, really, and wouldn't have worked at all. So you really have to nail all that stuff. If you're not going to have a big monster or something, you need to really nail it. And
they don't overuse like the footsteps or the like the creepy little noises, but when they are there, again, it's super effective. Like when there's the equivalent of a chase scene of one person following another in the night, and you just hear just a little bit of overlapping footsteps, and that in itself is creepy enough to be like, So yeah, I really like the sound design. Great one to look at for that. And then the other thing that I enjoyed about this movie is just all the allusions to like animals. We talked about the artwork that's in her apartment. She also sketches, is one of her sketches. She's at the zoo and she's sketching the panther. And then Oliver buys her a kitten, which is like the worst idea because she's afraid of cats. But the kitten is super duper cute and nothing bad happens to it that we see. So they go back to the pet shop because, the kitten doesn't seem to react well to Arena, and she doesn't seem to want the kitten. So they're like, okay, let's go exchange it. And then all the animals go nuts when she walks into the store, which I thought was great as well. I don't know how they achieved it exactly, but it was really cool.
Have you seen many other Val Lewton produced films like I Walked with a Zombie? This had a sequel, Curse of the Cat People. Then there's Leopard Man, I think was also Val Lewton. Have you seen some of those other films, and how do you think they compare if you have?
So I actually have a Val Lewton box set that I'm working my way through. I have seen I Walked with a Zombie, which I love. I've not seen the sequel, Curse of the Cat People. And then there's another movie of his that I have seen. I don't think it's part of the box set, but it's called The Body Snatcher. And that's also really good. And it also stars Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. And it's a really kind of harrowing story about body snatching. What else? And it's definitely a creepy one. So that's really good. And again, all of these I feel like have that really great signature atmosphere where I know he made it for, not much money, but he brought so much style to these movies that could have been cheap and cheesy, and he makes them classy somehow. So I think he really brought a sense of, these may be movies that are made for cheap and they seem disposable, but because he brought so much like ideas and so much imagination to them and so much quality, they've lasted this long and we're still talking about them. They're not as disposable as they could have been if they were made by a different producer. The last movie that we'll talk about tonight has a connection to the first one we talked about because while the first one starred Charles Laughton, this one was directed by Charles Laughton. I'm talking about The Night of the Hunter, which came out in 1955 and starred Robert Mitchum, Shelley Winters, and Lillian Gish, along with two, I think, quite capable children who acted in it. And this movie is, frankly, one of my all-time favorite movies. I mean, I would say it's in my top 10 list. It might be in my top 5. I absolutely 100% adore The Night of the Hunter. It is terrifying. It is gorgeous. I guess I should tell you what it's about. So basically, it's a story about a con man who pretends to be a minister, but he's really a serial killer who's going around basically like stealing money from widows and then leaving them behind, usually not alive.
Though I will say they never are terribly clear if he is pretending to be a priest or if he is like somebody who trained to be a priest but then became what you just said, a con man killer.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yes. I suppose that's fair to say.
Well, now, what's it to be, Lord? Another widow? How many's it been? 6? 12? I just remembered. You say the word, Lord. I'm on my way. You always send me money to go forth and preach your word. A widow with a little wad of bills hid away in a sugar bowl. Lord, I am tired. Sometimes I wonder if you really understand. Not that you mind the killings. Your book is full of killings. But there are things you do hate, Lord. Perfume-smelling things, lacy things, things with curly hair.
And so that character's played by Robert Mitchum, and he famously has tattooed on his knuckles love and hate. If you've seen that before in other things, it's definitely referenced a lot. And he comes upon a small town where a woman and her children have recently lost the man of the house because he was apparently a bank robber or something, and he was caught, so he went to jail. The kids know where the money is, but nobody else does.
Listen to me, son. You've got to swear. Swear means promise. First, swear you'll take care of little Pearl. Guard her with your life, boy. Then swear you won't never tell where the money's hid, not even your mom.
Yes, Dad.
You understand?
Not even her?
You got common sense, she ain't. When you grow up, that money will belong to you. Now stand up straight and look me in the eye. Raise your right hand. Now swear. I'll guard Pearl with my life.
I will guard Pearl with my life.
And I won't never tell about the money.
And I won't never tell about the money.
And so that kind of sets up this very interesting situation where...
Because Robert Mitchum, his character was roomed with the father before the father was hung, because he also, the father, in this bank robbery, I guess somehow killed 1 or 2 people.
Exactly.
So the priest knows, Robert Mitchum knows there's money, he doesn't know where it's at.
Yes. So he's after the money, but he has to still use his ruse of he's a preacher who's also, looking for a good woman. And so he finds what he thinks is one, or she thinks she's found a good man anyway. And I have to say there's several town folk here. Evelyn Varden and Don Beto playing the Spoons, which I think is just a great name. Evelyn Varden's character's name is Icy Spoon, and I just think that's hilarious.
I don't think I realized that was their last name.
Yeah. So yeah, they are her employers, and they also encourage them to kind of get together, and things go downhill badly from there. So I am so curious to hear what you thought of this movie, because I just basically feel like I can't even be objective about it anymore. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Worst film I've ever seen. I'm just
Oh
kidding. No, I'm
no!
kidding. No, I'm kidding.
Podcast over.
I mean, there's Plan 9 from Outer Space, then below that is Night of the Hunter. No. So I think, like you with Cat People, I had heard this film trumped up a lot. Which should be mentioned. I think we can get more into this, the whys of this later, but this should be mentioned. This is the only film Charles Lawton ever directed, so cherish it for because there's no more before this one. But I mean, partially I've heard about it because of its greatness. Partially I heard about it because, and I remembered it because Charles Lawton was the only film he directed. And it was the first time I became aware of Charles Lawton because I looked him up. I was like, oh, who is this person who only directed this one film? So I had trumped up a lot. And it was kind of a slow build. It's certainly not like my favorite film of all time or anything like that. But certainly by the end of it, there's a certain quality about it that I can't ignore. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it. By the end of it, I was enjoying it a lot. But there's a quality about it you just can't ignore because, I mean, the big star of it in terms of performance is certainly Robert Mitchum, who does great as this possibly fake, or at least not practicing priest who's killing people and all that stuff, who's Harry Powell. I forget if we mentioned his name, but he has a great performance in this film. But then there's also, I mean, the cinematography, there's the kind of tone of it. I think my wife read last night when we were watching it that Charles Lawton took inspiration from Grimm fairy tales, and the way it's shot with the exterior shots, it feels different from other 1955 films, and it's different. It's certainly a unique, I think, production, especially for that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first time I watched it, what really stood out to me the most, besides Robert Mitchum, who I think is absolutely stellar, the thing that stood out to me the most was the cinematography, which is absolutely unparalleled. It's by Stanley Cortez, who's done, a million film noirs, and he also did, things like The Magnificent Andersons, and he's worked with Samuel Fuller, so he's done a lot of work, but this is absolutely his peak.
Well, I will say, I do want to, before we go on with hailing his cinematography in this film, and rightly so, I do want to briefly read off part of his filmography that my wife read off last night. So he did Black Cat, he did The Magnificent Ambersons, which we mentioned before. He did Abbott and Costello Meet Captain Kidd, and he also did, and I don't know, I can't remember if this is his last film, but if he did, he went out with the winner, the classic film, They Saved Hitler's Brain, from 1968.
Yeah, you got to retire on They Saved Hitler's Brain.
So obviously he had a wide variety of things that he did, from great quality stuff to They Saved Hitler's Brain, which I think
I've never seen, but I assume it lives up to the name.
No, but I think that's a great film to go out on. I've heard it's absolutely awful, but anyway, but for this film, yes, he does do a great job. So I go on with that. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, the shot that really sold me is early on, and the editing, I should mention too, is great. Robert Golden does the editing, but there's an early shot where the children are up in their bedroom, second floor of the house. It's dark. Little sister is asking her brother to tell him a story. Her name is Sally Jane Bruce. She plays Pearl Harper, and her brother Peter Graves is Ben. And so she's asking for a story. He's telling her a bedtime story that seems loosely based on events of their own life. And all of a sudden, he's standing in front of the window, and all of a sudden, you see from the little girl's perspective this hat silhouette come through, and it's so big that it engulfs her brother entirely, and she gasps, and we gasp too, because it's so sinister and so scary. And of course it's Robert Mitchum standing outside their gate, just pausing for a second, and then he keeps walking. Yep.
And you're seeing this great song they sing throughout the film.
Yep. And, leaning on the everlasting arms.
And by the way, Robert Mitchum, great voice.
Oh my God, so good.
Leaning on the everlasting arm.
I will say, it's a slight correction so somebody doesn't do it later. The little boy is played by Billy Chapman, he plays John Harper.
John,
Peter Graves,
that's right.
Peter Graves is the
Peter
father
Graves
who
is their
plays
dad.
Ben Harper.
Sorry
Anyway,
for that.
no, it's okay. But no, that scene of that shot of him, which is, I mean, I think if you Google certain phrases of cinematography and light and shadow and stuff, you'll see that shot of him, a still of that shot of Robert Mitchum under the streetlight. And it's something that fits the kind of fairy tale, the dark fairy tale nature of it. And it's just kind of something you would see kind of out of A Nightmare, because you can't really see him very well.
There are many more perfect shots in this movie, but that was the first one that let me know I was in for something different.
Yeah.
And then I think also just the way that the house is set up, the bedroom that their mother is in, and then eventually, of course, Harry Powell spends some time in there as well. It looks like the ceiling is so slanted. It kind of looks like a church in a way. It looks like the inside of a church or a chapel.
Yeah, it's very
it's
a very kind of German expressionistic set, that one, with the lighting and the way the set is. It's a lot of sharp angles and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Which I think was super intentional from Lawton's perspective, and from his cinematographer Stanley Cortez's perspective. Is they were borrowing a lot from Murnau and silent pictures and German expressionism. That was a huge influence on this movie. And I think that you mentioned it stands out from other movies of the 50s. That's because it's hearkening back to silent films.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes it more powerful.
And I think it should be surprising that I think Lawton is leaning towards that, because there's a certain stage aspect to German expressionism. And in terms of the look of the film, it goes with some other stuff that's not strictly German expressionism, but certainly I think harkens back to the theater in certain ways. Like at one point there's a silhouette of a house that's just kind of a shadowy outline of that. It's kind of like a silhouette play, practically. And they do that later, too, with Robert Mitchum on a horse. You just kind of see his shadow on a hill. And again, it's kind of like a shadow play type stuff, which reminded me, one, of shadow plays, but also of plays, of stage stuff, too. And this certainly is not a stage thing. It doesn't feel stagey, but he borrows some of the best design elements that you would do on the stage and implements them into a film beautifully. I mean, my wife only saw part of this film, and she was just talking about how gorgeous the film looked.
Yeah, even the stuff that is nightmarish and scary, and
like
really,
the scene under the pond. We won't say what is pond, but
we won't say what you see, but it's in the river. It's underwater in the river. Is just absolutely stunning. I mean, it's scary, but it's also beautiful, and I think that balance or that off-puttingness is exactly what he's going for. Just gorgeous. The other thing that I really like about this movie, and I haven't seen it in many others, is all of the nature shots. There's so many shots of little animals and birds and, nature along the riverbanks. A lot of it shot at night, and I think that also adds to that, kind of like nightmarish Mother Goose story thing that he was going for, that all the little creatures are out, and that makes it a little bit creepier as well. And it also adds to the feeling that the two kids are just as vulnerable as these small woodland creatures to the predators of the world.
Yeah, I noticed actually there's a lot of animals that kind of symbolizing prey, and at one point they show, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but they show a turtle at one point, which I don't know if that's supposed to signify the Robert Mitchum is chasing these kids and, slow and steady win the race type thing. Like he's going steady, but he's going to catch them eventually. I will say something, I don't know if I'd say I don't like it. I don't know if I would say that it's a fault of the film or if it's matching with fairy tale stuff or grim fairy tale type elements. But the adults, except for Lillian Gish, the adults in this are annoying and kind of morons. Because at one point, the mother, played by Shelley Winters, is hesitant to get with this priest guy because she's worried that he's interested in the money. And the Mrs. Spoon just says, just ask him if he's interested in the money. Yeah, because there's no possible way he could just, lie about that. And it's just frustrating. It was interesting because I think I've mentioned on this podcast before, I'm sensitive to stories with children being in danger or children being distressed or whatever. And I thought I might have that problem with this film because it is mainly about children being in danger from this guy. But oddly enough, I really wasn't bothered by that as much as I was more worried throughout the film that they were going to run into another stupid adult who wouldn't listen to them, which maybe is, I think, maybe partially one of the points of the film is that maybe adults don't always listen to children and the warnings that they give. But that was a slightly kind of frustrating aspect of the film, but maybe an intentional one.
I think in some ways it's not entirely unbelievable, perhaps not to this extent, but I think about the number of cover-ups that have happened or people that have sort of shrugged off accusations of wrongdoing among clergy and religious folks, whether it's the priest scandals or the various things that have happened where somebody who purports to be a religious leader certainly seems to have a little additional cover in any actions that they take. People just sort of give them the benefit of the doubt if they want to believe what they're teaching. And if they share those religious beliefs, then they tend to think, okay, I trust them. And so it's like a shortcut to getting somebody's trust. It's like, you don't need any character references. We don't need to know you for more than 2 days. You can marry this lady. No, you probably have cynical motives.
Jesus.
And I do hope that it's gotten better. I think in the age of the internet where we can Google people and like look at background checks, it's a little better. But I still think there's a little hesitance to people being as skeptical as perhaps they should be when a new person rolls into town with, a slick new version of the gospel.
Yeah, I think that was one of the intentions of Lawton. He did want to talk about, I forget the exact wording of it, but I think talk about the over-trusting nature that people would have in people like the clergy or whatever, and the failure of certain adults to not see past. It's the kind of just the thin outer layer and just kind of see more of what the character is of these people. Let's talk about Robert Mitchum. Besides the cinematography, I think he's the thing that you're going to remember from this film. Robert Mitchum is just kind of perfect for this, and he plays it exactly, I think, right. I can't really imagine anybody else doing this as well as he does it.
Apparently, he auditioned for the role, and Lawton immediately liked that he brought the swagger that he did, but also Mitchum had like a persona as almost like a sex symbol in a way. And I think that maybe underscored this character, because this character purportedly like hates sex, thinks it's sinful. Even, in a marriage, he seems uninterested in it, which I think there might have been some underlying messages we maybe are supposed to read into that. But I think Mitchum does bring a certain swagger and a certain sexiness to this role of a guy who has a lot of baggage, let's say, around sex.
Yeah, and he brings into this town this kind of perverted, but not, sadly, unrealistic, kind of cultish religion. It's a quite disturbing scene, short scene with Shelley Winters and Robert Mitchum, where they're talking to the town and trying to convert them to this kind of perverse view that Mitchum has on the gospel, which is just sadly quite timely in its cultish behavior, and is very unsettling. And I'm sure is a comment Lawton was giving on how you can pervert religion to dangerous and unhealthy extents.
You have all sinned. Yes. Which one can say, as I can say, that you drove a good man to murder because I kept a-hounding him for perfume and clothes and face paint. And he slew 2 human beings. And he come to me and he said, take this money and buy yourself the clothes and the paint. Yes. But brethren, oh, that's where the Lord stepped in. That's where the Lord stepped in.
Yes.
He said, the Lord, to that man, you take that money and you throw it in the river.
In the river!
Yeah, I think especially with it setting in the 30s and it's, the Great Depression, I think people at that time were probably just hungry for any message that would give them hope or that would give them a sense of control over their lives. And this guy comes along who seems to have some answers. So I think in a way that also is why the widow is so willing to marry him after like just a few days, is she needs to provide for her kids, and here's somebody that can help her do that. But the other townspeople, again, I think they're just swept up in the ideology, and you're right, it's timely because there's movements now that I scratch my head and think how can anybody buy into that, and yet people that I know that I consider to be thoughtful and intelligent people have bought in. So I guess, yeah, in a way, this is a message that doesn't go away. Like, beware of people that come along with these new ideas. Like, make sure that you don't just take them at their word.
Beware, as they say at the beginning of the film, beware the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Wolf in sheep's clothing. One of the things I wanted to draw attention to is the music. We've already talked about Robert Mitchum singing Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. And I think that having that as a through line certainly is effective. And then the film's score is also great, and that's composed and arranged by Walter Schumann. And there's this great lullaby that is sung when the kids are along the river, I believe, that is just, it's gorgeous, but it's also, again, one of those things where you're like, if you listen closely to the words, it's also creepy.
Hush, little one, hush, my little one, hush. Morning soon shall light your pillow, birds will sing in yonder willow.
And I think that the Coen brothers have definitely borrowed from this. In fact, if you think about it, a lot of elements of this movie, I can see influences on modern filmmakers, but the Coen brothers are the first ones that come to mind as, you know, kind of taking these small towns, southern towns, and a sinister presence who's perhaps like a con man. I think the balance of like off-putting, strange humor and interesting shots thrown into stuff that's very dark, and also their cinematography, because they're also well known for working with great cinematographers. Yeah, a lot of parallels. I don't think they would be who they are today, and I think they've actually mentioned this as a specific reference of theirs. So we've been talking of this film for the last few minutes, and obviously we love it, and it's, you know, beloved by some of the best filmmakers that are out there today. Unfortunately, the reason that Charles Laughton never made another movie, or never directed, I should say, another movie, is because this was not successful in its day. It was a commercial flop, and the critics hated it. So unfortunately, he decided to go back to just acting, and I think we probably lost a lot of fascinating would-be films as a result. But apparently people in 1955 just weren't ready for this kind of movie.
Yeah, and I've seen, because I heard that thing last night about its critical and commercial failure were the reasons why he didn't do more. I also read before we started, too, that it was less, not really because of the commercial failure, but also just because he preferred theater directing, where you could make changes throughout the course of a production run. Where once it's filmed, it's done. You can't make any changes with it, which I think he found frustrating. But whatever the reason, because he ended up preferring theater directing, or because of the poor reception of this at the time, which he died in, I think, 1963, 67, something like that, and not too long after this film. Like it's 7 or 8 years after this film came out. I hope that he lived to see this reevaluated. I don't know when exactly that reevaluation happened, but hopefully it was in his lifetime, because I would hope that he would have lived to see people respecting the brilliance of the film.
Yeah, I don't know when it became a classic. I believe in the 70s it was sort of rediscovered, so it may have been after Laughton had passed. I know that Ebert wrote extensively about it and said that he felt it held up as one of the most frightening movies of, you know, the last 4 decades is when he said that. So, yeah, it's one that I think you'll see over time continue to be referenced. In fact, Kaiju Cinema has it ranked number 2 on the best movies of all time. And I would certainly get behind seeing this thing added to many more lists. If you haven't seen it, it's a must-see for sure.
Yeah, and like Rosalie said, it's certainly a crime that Laughton didn't get to do more movies. It would be interesting to see what he would have done with other things, especially maybe stuff that was in totally different genres. If he was interested in such things, it would have been nice to see different styles of him, whatever those might have been. But I think we can at least look at the bright side that if it's sad that, yes, he didn't direct more things, but I guess we can look at the bright side that at least if he was going to direct one film, thankfully it was a film that was directed as well as he acts. He's as good of a director as he is an actor. So I think that is at least a positive in this kind of small tragedy of his filmography.
So in addition to watching these movies this month for Halloween, the Criterion Channel has also gifted us with 70s Horror Collection, which is just a treasure trove of fascinating examples of 70s horror. So anything from Trog to Let's Scare Jessica to Death to Don't Look Now to The Wicker Man, Death Dream, Rabid, The Hills Have Eyes original, and various others. So I haven't gotten through all of these yet. There's a lot there, but a few that I would definitely recommend if you get a chance to watch. So definitely make time, if you haven't already, for Black Christmas, the original, Bob Clark directed. This is a classic. It's scary, but not over the top, and it features some great performances. Margot Kidder is awesome in this movie. John Saxon, who I adore, R.I.P., is in this movie as well, and that one is certainly worth your time. I also love Brian De Palma's Sisters, also with Margot Kidder, and that one is on this channel and also worth seeing if you haven't already. Another one that I would like to point out is Let's Scare Jessica to Death. This one is more atmospheric, a lot less gore, a lot less over the top specific like jump scares or anything, but it certainly has a creepy mood to it. And if you enjoy psychological horror and you're a little bit scared about watching something like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is also on the channel right now, this one is a little more subtle, but it certainly will leave you with an unsettled feeling. So I would recommend that one as well.
So coming soon for the Criterion physical releases, as of our recording anyway, there are 4 new ones listed. All 4 of them I have know absolutely nothing about, but I will list them anyway. There's a collection, you can help me on the name maybe.
3 films by Luis Buñuel.
And then we have Minding the Gap. And then we have a film by Martin Scorsese, Rolling Thunder Review, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. And then we have The Ascent. So yeah, I think nothing about these films except possibly The Ascent. I'm not sure. But do you know anything about these ones?
I do. So I'm most excited about Minding the Gap. It was a documentary by Rockford's own Bing Liu. It's about a group of skateboarders, and it gets into a lot more than just their skateboarding, which is quite cool to watch as well. But it gets into their family life. It deals with the economy. I'm making it sound really boring, but it's one of the most moving and beautiful films that came out in its year. And it was nominated for an Academy Award as well. It's just a really well-made film. It's a very personal film for the filmmaker, and I highly, highly recommend it. That one's coming out in January. I'm very excited to see what they do with it. I think the cover art is absolutely gorgeous. And, I'm always a sucker for documentaries. But again, this one is, super personal, super unique. I would highly recommend it. And notable because I believe, if this is correct, this is the first film that Criterion has released from an Asian American director. That's what I heard. You can fact check me on it, but I think that is true. So that's pretty cool. And then I'm excited for the Luis Buñuel set. I have not seen any of these 3 movies. I've seen Exterminating Angel, but I have not seen, this is Discreet Charm of Bourgeoisie, Phantom of Liberty, and That Obscure Object of Desire. So these have been on my list to see for a while because I have a soft spot for, anything from Buñuel and people of that ilk that have kind of that absurdist viewpoint. I enjoy that kind of thing. So I'm excited to check these out. I have not seen any of them. And I am less familiar with, Rolling Thunder Review. I know the music. I don't know the particular film. And then The Ascent by Larissa Shepitko, I'm excited to watch as well. I have not seen it, but I've heard good things. I know it's a war movie, but it's supposed to be a very poetic war movie. So I'm always interested in that. All right, well, that wraps it up for this episode. Let's get into a preview of what we're doing over the next couple months. So in November, it's going to be the 1-year anniversary of this show starting. And because we're in partnership with 25yearslatersite.com, which is a Twin Peaks themed website, or it was started that way, I should say, we're going to do a little David Lynch tribute. So we're going to be celebrating and reviewing the movies that David Lynch has released on the channel up to this point, which include Eraserhead, Elephant Man, Blue Velvet, and Mulholland Drive. I've seen all but one of these. I'm very excited to revisit the 3 I have seen, and Elephant Man will be brand new to me, and I'm very excited because Tim says he has not seen any of them.
Nope.
So this is going to be fun. And then in December, we're going to be talking about unusual Christmas movies. We have a double feature with Blast of Silence and Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. January is a little bit TBD at this moment, but we're planning on doing something a little different and maybe taking a look behind the scenes rather than reviewing an actual movie or two. So more to come on that, but we will be looking forward to talking more with you in the future. So thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I am your co-host, Rosalie Lewis, alongside my co-host,
Tim Rosenberger.
And you can find my work on Twitter, twitter.com, and my handle is Rosalie Lewis.
And you can find me on Twitter at CinemaPackRat.
And again, we thank 25yearslatersite.com for their partnership, and we look forward to talking to you again very soon.
What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms.